Welcome back to another episode of the Crime Scene Insiders. I'm one of your hosts, Angela Davies, and I'm here with my co-host, Dion Watson, and we're going to take you under the barrier tape. So before we get into today's episode, we've got some really big news for you. Dee and I are going to be joining the lineup at CrimeCon Birmingham on the 25th of April 2026. And then we'll be back again for CrimeCon London on the 3rd and 4th of October 2026. Birmingham is a brand new stop for CrimeCon UK, and it's already shaping up to be something special. We're going to be there alongside some of the most recognisable voices and experts in true crime for a full immersive day of stories, insight and conversations. Tickets are limited for Birmingham, so make sure you get yours as soon as possible to avoid disappointment.
And then we're going to be taking everything to the next level in London, which is another chance to meet, chat theories and dig deeper into the cases that we cover. Whether you've been listening to us since the beginning or you've only just discovered us, we'd love for you to say hello at either event. Or better yet, come and say hi at both. Hang out with us and the rest of the true crime community at CrimeCon Birmingham and CrimeCon London, partnered by the True Crime Channel, the expert-led true crime channel available wherever you listen. Just head over to crimecon.co.uk and use our promo code INSIDERS for 10% off your ticket.
Announcements about guest speakers and content creators are being released on the CrimeCon UK social channels, so keep your eyes peeled. 2 cities, 2 incredible events. We can't wait to see you there. And now for this week's episode.
Today's guest is one of our favourite humans of all time, Brian Rankin. And we've known Brian for a long time now. He has guided us through university. He was Ange's dissertation tutor at both her undergraduate and on her master's degree. And then he became our non-executive of our first business, CSI Training and Events Limited, many years ago now. And he supported us through that and guided us, and he's always given us fantastic advice. And we always turn to him whenever we've got some big decisions to make. So we're really excited that we've managed to con him into coming onto the podcast with us today.
Conned you into it.
Yeah, because as well as being a mentor to us, Brian is a highly experienced UK forensic scientist, and he has decades of operational, academic and professional leadership experience across his discipline. And he has led the way in quality standards, accreditation, and he's helped shape education of forensics across the time as well. He sat on numerous strategy boards, and he was also the president of the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences. So Brian's career really helps bridge frontline forensic science, national standards development and professional leadership. And it gives them a really rare perspective on both how evidence is produced and how the discipline itself is governed. So today we're going to talk about all of that. And we're also going to include one of the cases that still sparks debate decades later, the murder of Jill Dando. So, massive welcome to the show, Brian, and thank you for agreeing to come on and have this conversation with us.
You're welcome. That was some introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to that.
It's all true. You're one of our first forensic scientists we've had on the show. To get us started, could you describe the role of a forensic scientist and where they fit in within the investigative process?
I think you describe forensic science as, first of all, a good science, and you apply that science within the investigative process. So what's the investigative process? Well, it's from a crime scene, and some would argue it starts before that in terms of training, etc., to the investigation of the crime at the scene, to looking at the evidence that's recovered from the scene, and then presenting that to the courts of law. And the key little thing about the forensic scientist is that you work for the court. You don't work for the person who's commissioning that particular work. You do obviously work for them. You might even get paid by them. But your ultimate responsibility is to the court of law. And you present that as generally an expert witness, and they decide if you're the expert witness. So I think that's where it's taking that science. And the science that I was involved with was then called, this is going way back to the late 70s, forensic
You're
chemist.
not that old.
I am. I'm ancient. Interestingly, when I joined the Weatherby Laboratory after the Masters in Forensic Science at Strathclyde University in Scotland, there were about 70 to 80 members of staff. Nearly half those staff were in the forensic chemistry department, dealing with crimes of criminal damage, burglary, fire investigation, robbery. And the other half was made up of biologists, drugs and toxicologists, document examination. And if you look at that now, all these years on, when we've had things like DNA come in, the whole dynamics or the way the population of the lab is split is quite different. So the forensic chemist who used to be king, yay, now is a much smaller part. The chemist who would deal with the contact traces, because forensic science is about contact between things, doesn't have to be people, between things, could be the scene or a person or some form of object. It's glass, paint, footwear. The footwear is a lovely example because you would talk about footwear marks, maybe shoe mark, but footwear marks left at the crime scene. You try to link that back to a shoe from a suspect. Now you'll be using video to look at the photographs of the uppers of the shoes. We never did that. So technology has shaped things, but the numbers of chemists, what I would refer to the old style forensic chemist, is much smaller. And the role of the forensic biologist, particularly of DNA, has grown hugely. In those early days, there were quite a few miscarriages of justice. If you remember way back, the days of the Guildford Four, the Birmingham Six, the Priest case, which involved England and Scotland. And there was a focus on forensic science. And it made you wonder, what am I joining here? I thought I was joining a really big organization within the Home Office with all its 6 laboratories and a big research establishment. How cool was that? And then, but forensic science was at the point where it has made errors, it has made mistakes. And you think, no, that can't be right. Surely that can't be right. And then, of course, quality standards were introduced, and I think transformed how we did things in many ways. But that's a very quick introduction about forensic science, the application of the science within a legal framework. Because remember, the 3 key areas are the police, the forensic science, the lab, if you like, and the court, the legal people. So there we go.
You talked there about forensic chemists, forensic biologists, and different disciplines. What I don't think people realise is the number of disciplines that fall under the umbrella of forensic science. People hear forensic scientist, and I don't think they truly know what that means. And I don't think they realise how many different disciplines fall, like I say, within that umbrella.
It's endless, Angela. It's absolutely endless. Because what you're doing is you're taking the discipline, chemistry, biology, physics, accountancy, law, whatever you want. What's important is if you stick a forensic in front of that, you then change how your work is done and how you approach it, because it will come under huge scrutiny within the court.
Yeah.
So you can take any discipline you wish and you can carry on doing your archaeology. You can go and dig up the ground. That's great, you're an archaeologist. But if you become a forensic archaeologist, then the emphasis changes in how you do your work, how you record what you do, how you interpret what you find, because the court needs some guidance and some help, which is why it's going to call you in as the expert to help them reach their decision, whatever that decision might be. In the UK, it'll be you're guilty, not guilty. In Scotland, it might be not proven.
It is interesting. The landscape's changed a lot over the years, hasn't it? And I think that in education it has as well, which we'll probably come on to a bit later. But a lot of people started sticking the word forensic in front of courses to attract more students to it and make it a bit more exciting. And it wasn't always necessarily a forensic discipline per se.
No, and it was forensic. And then it became forensics. And then we got to forensicate that scene.
Yeah.
Oh,
Don't
our
get us
favourite
started.
saying.
Yeah. So things have changed hugely over the years. And of course, from my perspective, we're talking 40 odd years.
Yeah.
Gosh, nearly 50 actually.
Wow.
And still not fully retired. You just love it so.
No, still
Yeah.
doing bits.
What actually drew you into forensics in the first place, Brian?
That's a really interesting question. It's one of those things that as you're growing up, you say, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, look, just keep doing whatever you're doing at school and then keep doing what you pass. But I was doing the biology and the chemistry, more on the science and the language side. But I always had an interest in forensic science. And I can remember one of my friends for my birthday bought me a book, Forensic Science by, I think it was H.G. Wells. Yes, his first book. And I read that cover to cover. And I'm not a great reader. I honestly, it doesn't thrill or excite me, which is rather unusual
That
for a human being.
surprises me.
That surprises me
anyway,
as well.
but I read that, and there's some wonderful little quips in there about what forensic science is. And that was in 1974 when I got that book. And then I went and did my first degree in Northern Ireland, and then I said, well, look, if I fancy forensic science, maybe we should try and get a qualification in it. And at that time, in the late 70s, there was essentially just Strathclyde University. So this little chap from Northern Ireland applying to go over to Strathclyde University and leave his home country. Oh, that was quite a big thing then. That's quite a big thing. And I just got married then as well. So the purpose went across to Strathclyde University. And that sealed the deal. I really, really enjoyed that.
Did you?
And you met lots of other people from all over the world coming to do that particular course. I can remember one of the exams that we had, did a practical involving blood grouping. The results weren't right. I said, it's just not working. So I took time in the exam to redo the whole thing again.
Wow.
And I remember at the end of the day, they said, that was a great scientific process. You did something, it didn't work. You went back, you had a look at it and tried it again. And that was the sort of education that they were instilling. You have an idea what a result might be, but you get that result because of what was right along the way. This reacted with that, and that reacted with that, and this is what should have happened, and there you go. Then you can interpret the results. Doing the course that got me into forensic science, then I applied and got posted to the Weatherby Laboratory in 1978.
That was the year.
And they had just amalgamated at that time. that lab had amalgamated from Newcastle and Harrogate. So there were sort of two lots of people coming together to make that lab in Weatherby.
When you started out, did you think that you'd still be in it all these decades later?
I think the answer to that was yes, because in those days you were starting your career, and your career was something that you did for the rest of your life. So my father had a career, my brothers had a career. That seemed like the thing to do.
Yeah.
But if I was a 20 or 25-year-old today, I don't think I'd be thinking the same way. I'll try this for a couple of years and try that for a couple of years, and then so I go on, and maybe eventually I might sort of settle down. But a lot of the forensic scientists I know, that's been their career. That really has. They stayed in it a long, long time. And going back, I mean, if there are older people listening to this podcast, names like Peter Cobb, Stuart Kind, Ray Williams, these were a lot of the big names at the time. And I worked with them through the Forensic Science Society, as it was then. And as a young whippersnapper, seeing these names, because that was the early days, lots of research in forensic science, seeing these people and working with them was so good. As the side, I was a little person who put the slides together, the old slides that you had in the carousel.
Yes.
And and that got me to the meetings where I could then meet these people. Of course, that was a bonus. But what people didn't realize was you had the carousel, and then you were given the slides by the speaker. Each slide has got 8 ways it can go into the carousel. So you can turn it as a square. That's round 4 times. You can flip it on something. That's 4 more times. Only one of those 8 is right. And of course, on the screen, particularly if you've got some picture then it's the wrong way around, oh no,
Oh
I got it wrong.
Oh.
But you got to meet the speakers and hear what they
Yeah.
were saying. And in those days, there was lots of research on persistence and retention and how far does glass fragment back when a window's broken? What about the blood spatter? All that sort of stuff. They were questions that the answers weren't known. And the research was being done. And that was why you felt when you joined what was then called the Home Office Forensic Science Service, with its operational laboratories and a central research, carrying out research for the UK, you sort of thought, that's like a good model to me. That feels like it's a good model,
Yeah,
which is unfortunately no more, but that's a separate story.
It's a great time to be part of forensic science, like you said, and a lot of
amazing.
experience and research. I mean, the developments you've seen over your time, you've seen it change shape many times.
The biggest one I remember was when DNA first started, and
Yeah.
they were saying you need sufficient blood to cover a 2p piece. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, there's quite a lot of blood to do all that, isn't it? Yeah, quite a lot of blood. And of course, now you've got that term like touch DNA sort of thing.
Yeah,
We're doing
That's
more,
right.
we do more and more with less and less. And if you
yeah, it's
apply, by
true.
the way, if you apply Irish logic to that, because I'm from Northern Ireland, I can say that. Apply Irish logic. You do more and more with less and less. Soon we'll be able to do everything with nothing.
Nothing.
I like
hence,
that.
hence the Irish logic.
Love it.
But one little thing that I remember, I mean, we're talking about the research, and that was great research done at the research establishment, and there were papers galore being produced in the research around forensic science. The Home Office Forensic Science Service in those days had what was called technical notes. So it was something that was a technical issue, but wasn't researched sufficiently well, or didn't merit going into a peer-reviewed journal. And in my early days, I had a case involving glass. And in that case, from the clothing from the suspect, was recovered a single fragment of glass. So the context was that someone was supposed to have a window was broken. The police think that this particular person had broken it. The person had been arrested. They'd taken their clothing. We'd searched the clothing, and we got one fragment of glass. And the question is, one fragment of glass. Was it clean and angular? Was it on the surface? Was it in a pocket? Where is its location? What's the material like to see how long that glass might be retained? Was the person picked up, within, say, 10, 15 minutes of a window being broken? Or was it days and days had passed before the person was picked up? All those questions were being asked. And I wrote a little technical note saying, this is an issue. How do you report a single fragment of glass? And the funny thing was that technical note then went round all the laboratories. So everyone had sight of the technical notes. And that received what I would refer to a mixed blessing, because you're sort of saying, look, it's a single fragment. It really isn't worth very much. And it didn't look that clean or sharp. So some people were saying, look, it's not really worth a lot. Don't need to worry about it. And other people saying, oh no, that could be highly significant. You don't want to underestimate. You still have found the fragment of glass. But it was sort of a balance between some people saying, yeah, you can do something with it, and some people saying, no, you can't.
Yeah.
Now, had it been a single fragment with 10 layers on it of different colors and different thicknesses, then it might have been a different story, but you still had to ask the question, could it be there because it just happened to be in the environment? I think the answer to that one is no for the 10 layers of paint. Maybe for glass it could be. Or could it have been contamination from somewhere?
Yeah.
Where did that single fragment come from, and how much emphasis do we put on it? In forensic science terms, those are big things to think about and talk about and debate. Sitting here in my chair thinking, why are you bothered? You know, the sun's shining outside and the black sky is blue.
Listen, you built a career for many years on this, so that's why you bothered. But
That's true.
it's important, isn't it? And I think that's one of the things about forensic science that people don't often get, is that it's all about context, and then based on the balance of probabilities and context of evidence, it plays such a crucial role. Just because you find forensic evidence doesn't mean your case is solved.
Angela, you've hit the nail right in the head. It's all about context. And then, given that context, what do you think you might find when you do your investigation, i.e., your lab work? And then you set that out. You say to yourself, look, I've been given a scenario here in terms of dates and times, and someone was arrested for this particular incident. If that's true, what would I expect to find, given that they committed that at that time frame wearing this clothing? Or if they didn't do it, what would I expect to find? Yeah. And you're weighing that up. You've then sorted yourself out, if you like. Okay, I've given that scenario. I've now done my thinking around it. I'm now going to start and do my searching, and then I'll do my interpretation. So you're absolutely right in that approach, Angela.
And then that's where police work comes in as well, because was that person close to the scene? What story is that person given? Were they saying they were 3 miles away at the time, but actually they've got this one fragment of glass on them? Or did they say they walked past and saw the window break? And all of that information also changes the weight of that evidence as well, doesn't it?
Can I just deviate for a tick? This is one of the little stories. One of the little stories I remember. A large window is broken in a street, and a lot of glass about, and a suspect is picked up within half an hour. Police arrest this person, put their clothing in the various bags, as you would expect them to do, and it comes into the lab. So you're looking at the case, you say the window was broken, a lot of glass about in the street. There's a person picked up within half an hour close by, and we've got his clothing. If he broke that window, then I would expect to find some, maybe on the hair and haired, if he had any hair, on the upper clothing, maybe on the outside of the clothing. If he'd walked past, maybe it would be in his shoes. But the most significant glass would be in the upper clothing, still on the outside.
Yeah.
And that's what you would expect to find. If he didn't do it, I wouldn't expect to find very much at all, if any. His clothing was searched. Didn't have any hair combings, but we had the upper jumper, which was a reasonably woolly jumper. If anything had fallen out, it would retain it. And we found lots of glass. Small, clean, angular fragments of glass. 30 or so, which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
So that would support the theory that, or the hypothesis, that they were close to the window when it was being broken. Certainly close to a window. Whether it was that window or not, that's another matter, but close to a window. And it was reported as a strong link, and that then went to court. And the defense was that he was out walking his dog, which is a small dog, but rather furry. And he came across, the dog was running around, and he came across this broken window, and he thought, oh no, I don't want my dog getting its paws cut. I lift the dog up and hold it tightly beside me, and then wait till we're past the window, then we'll be okay. And that is how the glass got from the jumper. Now that seems a very reasonable defense to me. There was one issue though. Guess what the issue was? He didn't have a dog.
You know what? I was just going to say that. I thought, surely not.
Is that
brilliant?
A real case?
That was honestly. I think in forensic chemistry, you didn't necessarily get involved in lots of high-profile cases, unlike the biologists with murders and sexual offences and things. But that was one of my little volume crime cases. That was a true story. He didn't have a dog.
That is
an idiot.
And the police not follow that defence up. The court may well have accepted that.
Yes.
You know, it seems quite plausible, didn't it?
My God.
Anyway, there we go.
Like I say, this is why we love criminals. As a forensic chemist, just to give a little bit more detail to our listeners, could you maybe talk us through what your average day might look like?
your average day, you would come in the morning, a normal length of work day, and you would have several files on your desk. Well, it could be more, it could be several to many. And these all related to maybe traffic accidents, where you were looking for two vehicles having collided. And although that was all about insurance, the police were involved and you had to sort of prove contact between the two cars. So you were looking at paint fragments, etc., and sometimes physical fits of indicator units left at the scene compared with the car. You maybe had a criminal damage, like the case we're just talking about with a broken window, or burglary where someone breaking the window and then entered into the premises. If you have more experience and then going on the what you call the fire rota for investigating fires, you might have a couple of those and might have a scene to go to. And you actually went to court quite a lot. You might be going to court maybe twice a month.
That is quite a lot, isn't it?
Generally, magistrates' courts might be, because we did, as a chemist, you were on the rota for doing blood alcohol analysis. So little vials coming in with blood, looking at the amount of alcohol there. And you'd be maybe doing two or 300 of those in a week. You'd be on for a week's rota. And quite often those would be going to court. Certainly not necessarily always just for the level, but for people drinking after the accident. Had they not had the drink after the accident, would they still have been over the limit? So you had the burglary, the criminal damage, and maybe some fire investigation and alcohol analysis. And you would work your way through those. Your experience, you might have maybe an assistant with you. In your early days, you started off as the assistant just to learn the ropes, working with a reporting officer who was the person who would write the final statement, and that would then go to court. And the nice little thing was, when you found something of significance, either physical thing that you found or a particular result, that would be checked by someone else independently. So, for example, let's imagine one of the strongest pieces of evidence that you could have would be a physical fit, i.e., where two broken objects physically fit back together again as if they were always one. You would come up to someone and say, can you have a look at these and see if there's anything special about them? You wouldn't say, look, I found this physical fit. What do you think? Because you've sown the seed that it's a physical fit. So you avoid that. So it's an independent examination. And then they would say, found physical fit, or it might be something that you're showing them. They would say, seen and agreed. And it might be something that they need to see, though you might not be able to recreate this again. So someone would have to see it and sign it that they had seen it. So when you went to go to court, I found this, and I had a colleague who'd seen it, agreed it. And then you would draft out your statement, and then that would have to go, and that would be checked again before it went to the typing pool. Typing pool!
Typing pool!
And when you had writing like mine, which wasn't the best of writing, wasn't the clearest and easiest to read, but your statement then went off, your handwritten statement went off, and that was then typed up, came back as a typed copy, which you then signed, and off it went back into the system again. And some of the practical work, after you did all the searching and the recovery, you would then maybe do the paint comparison or the glass comparison under microscopes. The best tool the forensic scientist can have is your microscope. But then it might go into a specialist unit for what I would call pyrolysis gas chromatography. Gas chromatography is a separation process. Pyrolysis where you burn, so you might burn a piece of paint. It separates it into all its little chemicals. You get a trace showing those chemicals. So a unit would be responsible for doing that, or you might be doing that yourself. So you had to understand the science. And sometimes then when the machinery got more technical, really it became to have an operator specifically for that. So you give your samples to them to analyze in your behalf. Can you compare A with B, C, and D? And they would do the analysis for you, simply because the machines were not only very expensive, but quite complicated to use. So you had specialist people operating those. You would be encouraged before you started the case to ring up the police officer to make sure that your understanding of the circumstances they had told you were correct. And then you would say, given that now I'm going to do A, B, C, I'm going to look at the hair combings first, or then I'm going to look at the jumper, or I think this is a kicking case. I think we should maybe we'll look at the shoes first of all for you and see what that gives. And the greatest attribute that you can have is you might have been working for the police, i.e., the majority of the work that you were doing came from the police, i.e., that'll be coming from the prosecution. You, again, we go back to this, you work for the court. You're helping the police to eliminate or be included in their investigation. You're not thinking, yeah, this person did it, I'm going to find evidence that they did it. No, definitely not. Definitely not the thinking that you would be doing.
That's it. And you report on the facts, don't you?
You do report on the facts. And that's a really interesting comment, because the forensic scientist would often be trained as and looked upon as the expert witness, albeit it's the court who decides who the expert witness is. But the crime scene investigator, sometimes they aren't viewed as an expert witness, which I think is strange, very strange, because in that arena at the scene, they are the expert. Who went where, when, how? What are they going to recover? How are they going to recover? Why are they recovering that? Why didn't they do this? They're asking themselves all these questions. Going to a burglary, where would the perpetrator have gone if they committed a burglary? I need to go and check in the bedroom or whatever. But anyway, you're the expert witness, and therefore you can express an opinion, not just a fact. You can express an opinion. That makes it a unique role within the legal system, where they're asking for your opinion, and your opinion is to help the court reach a decision, not to help the prosecution, not to help the defense. It may help one of them, but that's not your aim. As the case is built up, quite often, if you had a major case, if you were on the fire rota, for example, and when you went out to a major fire investigation, you might spend days there, and then you're thinking, but that pile of 15 cases, it's still sitting there on my desk, and I've been 3 days here. And I remember on one occasion, I just thought, do you know what, this is getting too much. And I went to my boss at that time, the boss, Graham Devonport, and I said, Graham, I'm struggling here a minute. I'm not going to get through all this. That he felt awful having to say that. Do you know what he did? He says, how many cases have you got? What's your most important one? He gave me the most important one, and he took the others off. He said, just do that one. Forget these.
Oh.
When that one was done, he then said, I went back to him and said, look, I finished this. And I said, well, here you are. There's a couple there. Try those. And before you know it, within a matter of few days to a week, was back on top of it again, managing all those cases, no problem. And I'll never forget, he didn't do anything special with them. He just set them over there in the corner.
Just took them off your mind so you weren't worrying about them, which is good management though, isn't it?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I'll never forget him for doing that. And quite often you see people struggling. That you just need to take something off them. You don't need to do anything with it. Just take it from them, so they don't have to think it's sitting on their shoulders. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Going to court in those days, that was quite a thing. And you had to take your comb, which I'd hair in those days, a flask of coffee, because there wasn't always a canteen there, and you don't know how long you're going to be there. You could be there all day and told to go away and then come back the next day. Make sure you took your case file. Occasionally, people would have forgotten to take the case file when they get the court offer to bring the case. And most importantly, a roll of toilet paper.
What? Why?
Oh, really?
Well, because you would be a little bit nervous and you might have to scoot off to the loo before you give your evidence. And there's nothing as awful as going into the loo and there's no toilet paper.
That's the top tip, that, Brian. I've not heard that one.
Things have changed since those days. They do have proper canteens and all that sort of stuff now, and there is toilet paper.
You hope so, anyway.
Yeah.
How did you find giving evidence in court?
You were always very, very nervous. You had read your case file back to front, upside down, every way. You knew all the facts. And you weren't sure when you were going to be called in. But they knew you were there as a witness, and you did. So you were sort of waiting. And then you would be called in. And if you hadn't been able to see the layout of the court before you went into it, everyone's waiting for this forensic scientist to come. You walk into court, you say, where am I going? Am I going right? Am I going left? Is it over there? You know, and uh, and then you always needed to remember who you were addressing your answers to. You took your questions from prosecution or defense, but you didn't answer them. You then turned to the magistrates or turned to the jury to give your answer. And it was quite nerve-wracking. It was always interesting because quite often have quite a long question, which had several questions within it. And you're thinking, I'll never remember all these. And you'd start very quickly on the side of your statement, you'd write down the points that they were bringing. And then they'd say, what are you writing down? And you'd have to, well, I'm writing down each of the questions that you've asked me so far.
You just asked me three in one. I need to pull them apart.
And you always had to ask, may I refer to my notes? As opposed to, you didn't dive straight in on the presumption that they were going to allow you to look at the notes. You had to ask permission from the court. Am I okay to look at my notes? And the answer would always be yes, of course. But there was an etiquette there.
It is a nerve-wracking process, isn't it? It's quite intimidating, I think, the court process. And people don't... I think that's another aspect of both crime scene and forensic investigation, that people, when they're thinking about going into this career, don't recognise that actually you are going to have to attend court and give evidence. And it can be a big part of the job and also intimidating part of the job.
Although, I mean, those days was maybe about twice a month. And now you might not even go twice a year. You know, things have changed, but you still have to go through that process, which is why in the academic arena, where those courses are running, forensic science courses, they will all include a mock court situation, so that the students, they change from their tracky bottoms and their loose top into a proper suit and shirt and tie sort of thing, or dress for the occasion, whatever how they feel they should dress for the occasion. And it can be quite nerve-wracking for them because you're getting someone who's supporting what you're saying. Maybe the prosecution or support, you found this and you did that and you think it made this, that sort of thing. Then the defense start and they're taking an alternative view. And that can be quite nerve-wracking for you to justify what you're doing.
Yeah.
Is there one particular case that you think maybe shaped you the most? One that stands out?
When I look back at a lot of my career, I mean, I enjoyed my time in the Forensic Science Service without a shadow of a doubt. And they, during that time, introduced quality standards and the standards that needed to be done in various examinations, etc. And you had all the supporting documentation of that. And that, of course, involved training.
Yeah.
And you had to do all of that. And there's one case that, remember, the context was in those early days that I felt that forensic science was being picked on to a certain extent. If there's something went wrong, it was the science, it was the forensic science that was wrong. You wanted to make sure, well, was that true, that it was wrong, or was there something else? And the tragic death of Jill Dando, to me, was one of those cases.
Yes.
It'll be people of my era, and I imagine yours as well, will remember a lady called Jill Dando. She was on breakfast TV. She was on the 6 o'clock news. She was on Crime Watch, the holiday program. I think there was a spotlight in the Southwest. You always seemed to be in the TV. And she had this amazing ability to make you, as the person who was watching the TV, it was like you were talking to your sister, like your best friend.
Yes.
She was just she just had that little magic bit that made her so successful.
She was very warm, wasn't she? And I think she was known like as the nation's sweetheart around the time.
The phrase of people, the girl next door.
Girl next door, yeah.
Yes.
No airs or graces. And something I discovered the other day, I tried to do a little bit of reading around this, was that in Crime Watch, if you remember, there was Jill Dando and Nick Ross were the two people who were presenting the case or the cases. And at the end, they would stand together and I think say goodnight or something. Jill would take off her high heels so she didn't appear taller than Nick Ross.
I've just seen that as well. So lovely, isn't it?
That just speaks oceans. I am not high and mighty. I am not better than you. I'm just an ordinary person having a chat to you. It was
Yeah.
so good. And that was why I think when then Jill was shot at her home address, hit the nation. Why did this have to happen?
Yeah.
What had gone wrong? You know, and although you've got major, big, high-profile crime where hundreds of people are maybe killed, but this one with one individual, this occupied a lot of police time.
It
A
was
lot of
it was
police time.
shocking at the time, wasn't it? It was a huge shock across the nation.
It happened in what, April 1999,
Yeah.
and there wasn't a lot to examine at the scene, and the body had been moved
Because
when
she
when the
just
police
arrived
got there.
home, hadn't she? So
She
she'd
was on
pulled
her
up
way.
outside her home and walked to the door, and then someone had approached and shot her,
Yeah,
hadn't they?
yeah, yeah. You got a FDR, farm discharge residue in her hair, obviously. In the early days, actually, the BBC News reported her as being stabbed, but in
Yes.
fact, she had been shot. And of course, in the early stages of an inquiry, you've got to be careful with information you give out because it can be maybe misleading. So that was initially thought maybe been stabbed, but actually had been shot. And was there a motive? What the police couldn't find any sort of motive. But a year later, a person called Barry George came back into the frame. Apparently, someone had been seen at the scene wearing a three-quarter length coat. That was part of the information that the police had. And they interviewed Barry George. His stories kept changing, but they eventually searched his house. And in his house, they found a three-quarter length coat. Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe those were quite popular in those days. Maybe lots of people had three-quarter length coats. But anyway, he had a three-quarter length coat. And that was taken and bagged up. Now then, this is a year after an incident. It was then taken from the bag and put on a dummy and photographed. That was probably photographed for very good reasons, as in, to show people that anyone recognize this coat. It was then put back in the bag and sent off for laboratory examination.
So that was done before it was examined at the forensic laboratory.
Now, you see, I think there's an issue there. If something is put in a bag and sealed, that then becomes part of your chain of continuity.
Yeah.
Taken from the scene, bagged up. At next stage is when it's going to be examined generally in a laboratory environment, clean benches, all that sort of stuff. But here it was taken out of the bag. So the question is, could anything have gone wrong at that stage? If anything was on it, it maybe could have fallen off. And where was that photograph taken?
Yeah.
In relation to other things happening in the environment where it was photographed. So I think there's an issue there. And then when it comes to the lab, it's going to be taken out, not knowing that it's already been out of the bag prior to being looked at. It was searched, and one small particle of firearms discharge residue was found in the inside pocket. Now, we spoke earlier about a window that's been broken, glass will what's called back fragment and land on someone's clothing. But then over time, if you're running away, well, that will fall off the clothing. But if something gets into a pocket, it can stay there for the length of that before coat disappears, if you like. It's sent off for recycling or whatever, so it'll always be there. And then you examine that fragment, and you find out it was a firearms discharge residue particle made up of lead and barium and antimony. Now, firearms is certainly not my expertise, but I understand that there are 5 types of FDR, and this was a type 2, as was the FDR in the hair from Jill Dando. So you start to think there's a bit of a link there. Then that was a year afterwards. Then in the May, which is 13 months afterwards, Barry George is actually arrested for the murder. And in the following April, that's 2 years on then, it goes to court. And The argument for the prosecution relates to changing stories in an interview, alibis that didn't seem to quite hold up, and of course this FDR.
The rest was quite circumstantial, other than the gunshot residue, wasn't it?
It was. So from that time in July or April, the end of April until July, the jury took many, many hours before reaching 10-1 majority in favour of guilty. And he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Now, in that situation, the prosecution, the scientist had been called by the prosecution, had said, there was only one fragment and it wasn't significant. There was then obviously, for such a case, there's a scientist for the defense who said that it was so small to rely on it a year after was incredible. That's true, except if it goes in the pocket and it's never taken out of the pocket again, it'll always be in the pocket, be it 1 day or 1 year or 10 years.
I suppose, does that depend on activity as well, and also washing, if it's being washed or?
Yeah. All of that, Angela, the activity makes stuff fall off, but if it falls into the pocket, it's unlikely to fall back out again.
Yes, yeah, but if it's washed, for instance.
Yes. The jury were told by the lawyer, I imagine the barrister, that there was compelling evidence. And you sort of have to wonder to yourself, was it really compelling evidence? So you have a situation where this little fragment is given a huge amount of emphasis within the investigation. Yet there was a year before it was found. It was taken out of the bag to be photographed before it went to the lab. And we don't know exactly where it was photographed, but that in itself could be an issue in terms of contamination.
Yeah, because if it was in a police station, for example, and if it's in a police station where you have firearm response or something like that, could there be gunshot residue already in that environment that could have transferred onto the clothing?
Correct. Absolutely right. And that is that a possibility? You have to say, yes, it is a possibility, given that context that you've just given. It then went to appeal, the initial appeal, shortly after, and it was turned down. And then here's the interesting bit. The scientist for the prosecution, who I knew in name, who's no longer with us, was sitting down with one of the people who was heavily involved in interpretation. And they sat down to have a chat about the case. And the likelihood, given two propositions, we've mentioned those earlier, that the appellant, the person who's been accused, was the person who shot Jill Dando. That's one. The other one is the appellant was not the person, was not the man who shot Jill Dando. And when they looked at both of those scenarios in relation to then what was found, they described that evidence as neutral. It doesn't necessarily support the prosecution, doesn't necessarily support the defense. And one of the great phrases that I remember, again going back to my mentor Graham Devonport, for something that was maybe only one fragment, whatever, the phrase that he used was, "This is as fortuitous as it is evidentially significant." I think that's a great phrase. It was as fortuitous as it was evidentially significant. In other words, it's as much by chance as it was going to be significant in evidence for the court. It was just a balance, and it was neutral. It wasn't strong one way or the other. Now, the thing is that after that, the Forensic Science Service, although it had, I would say, had the unspoken policy, but it actually had a policy then that, if you find one of these, just one fragment, then you have to be careful how you report that, and it might be of no significance. So there's the forensic science looking at an issue that was raised and learning from it and changing. The question is, to me, along that investigative process, when the police have got some items, do they ever take them out of the bag before it goes to the lab to have a look at them? And for the legal people at the end, are they aware of forensic science and the value of it and the significance of it? For you to take some information that was weak at the strongest point, you could call it weak, it's essentially of no real value, and to tell the jury that this is significant, it's compelling evidence, there's something that wasn't right. It just didn't come across as right. So my argument is, looking at the investigative process, we homed in at that time on the FDR, but there was stuff to think about for the police in training and stuff to think about the lawyers in training. And I was involved in the early days in the 90s with a thing called using forensic science effectively. And that's what it was, looking at how do we use forensic science effectively. It says what it does in the tin. And we had lots of interviews with police officers to produce this big document. Then there's Under Your Microscope 1, Under Your Microscope 2, I think, as well, all about the training and understanding. And I just wonder, thinking back to then, over 25 years ago now, the training that there was, do we still do as much training and awareness for first officers attending? Do we training and awareness for our legal people to the extent that we don't have these situations arising again? I suppose it's close to my heart now, because I was a few years ago diagnosed as having celiac disease, which means I can't have gluten. And if I get gluten, then I become rather ill. And that I could be rather ill and out of it for about a day and a half. So if there's gluten in terms of flours put into something that I eat, gets contaminated with it, or gets cross-contaminated. In other words, the bun with gluten in it is sitting beside a bun without gluten in it, but there's cross-contamination. The consequences of that for someone with celiac disease can be pretty rough.
Yeah.
So it's you go back to the consequences of taking that jacket out and looking at it before it gets examined in the lab. Are there serious consequences? The answer, I think, is yes. There can be.
When a man is getting a term of life in prison based on that single piece of evidence, then the consequences are significant. I mean, in the lab, the results are the results, but again, it's back to that context, isn't it? Because I think I remember in one documentary, I watched it a few years ago now, so I can't remember exactly, but I believe that they'd taken that coat out in an area where other items of Jill Dando's were. I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Is what other contaminants were in that area. And without the police documenting and noting that, that's always going to be problematic. But the other thing is if, in terms of integrity and continuity of evidence, a lot of the time, if something's come from the crime scene and not gone directly to the lab, and then what's happened with it hasn't been tracked appropriately, or that integrity can be brought into question, then really it becomes inadmissible in court. So should that jacket have even got as far as the Forensic Science Service?
That's a really good question, And the question is, when it was looked at by the Forensic Science Service, did they pick up that it had been sealed, unsealed, and resealed again? Because had the answer to that been yes, you would question the examination.
Yeah, because it shouldn't have been examined then, really, should it? Because it didn't have any integrity.
Because that scientist can no longer say that's come directly from the scene to me. I'm confident. I'm the next person opening it. And this has been handled only in sterile laboratory conditions. That scientist can no longer say that.
No.
Correct.
I'm not saying this happened here because I don't know, obviously, the circumstance for this one. But I personally have previously seen exhibits taken from scenes that have not been sealed, because they know that they're going to get someone to look at it back at the police station, for example. So there wasn't even a seal to be broken for the forensic scientist to know that had happened. So, like I say, I don't know that is the case with this investigation, but I have seen that happen before as well.
Numerous times.
It was at the end of the day, it then went to the CCRC to review these cases. And it went to Leveson, I think, was one of the judges on the appeal court. Yeah, the criminal. It went to, after that discussion about the evidence being neutral, it then went again to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and they look at, if there's new evidence coming, they look at the case to see whether it might be unsafe or needs to go back to court again. And that's exactly what it did. It was then took until May 2007, CCRC had it. And then in November 2007, it was Lord Justice Leveson and Honourable Mr. Justice Simon quashed it and said that the conviction was unsafe. Essentially, the FDR had no probative value. But they did, remember that they referred to, how the prosecution was using this phrase, compelling evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And they were critical then. The question is, have the lawyers done anything about that in terms of their training and understanding? There is a silver lining. If it's possible to have a silver lining under this tragic circumstances, is that what was created was a Jill Dando Institute as part of UCL, University College London, and that's devoted to crime science, promoting multidisciplinary research and crime security. So the name Jill Dando lives on, which is great.
It is, because it is essentially still an unsolved case.
The police said they still don't understand what the motive was.
No.
And quite often murders are committed by people who know their victims, and none of that seemed to link up for them at all. Very difficult.
There are a number of theories and conspiracies, but it's so hard really to pull that together, isn't it? Especially so many years later.
Yeah. Like you say, it's awful because Barry George served 8 years in prison for that and then was released. So obviously that had a massive impact on his life. And I think that's got to have been quite traumatic for Jill's family and friends as well. You think you've got justice for your loved one being murdered, and then all of a sudden for that to be pulled into question and someone released, that's got to be quite traumatic for them, I think, as well.
I mean, they will have empathy for the individual as well, in terms of, well, look, it hasn't been proven, but they still haven't got what you might call true closure.
Yes. Yeah. I think that there were a lot of lessons to be learned across the whole investigative process, like you say there, from the police investigation to the lab investigation to the way that the courts are given information. To say that the evidence was compelling was misleading at best, really, wasn't it? I don't feel enough training has been done at the police end for frontline responders, which is one of the reasons that we produced our app, because we were seeing a lot of issues around forensic awareness and mishandling of evidence even when we were in force, and we know that it's still happening to this day, which is the really sad thing about it. And again, I think it just shows that it all goes back to context, doesn't it? And how we interpret that and how that gets portrayed in court is really important.
Yeah,
it is, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt.
Do you think that juries understand forensic science well?
That's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because there's so many programs now on TV about what we would see as forensic science. And I watched recently an issue of Silent Witness. The pathologist is doing the investigation, they're out with the police. That doesn't happen.
It's not real life.
So they see what is great drama.
Yeah.
That's what the jury will see. And their expectations will be incredibly high. What can be done. And where technology has developed, and we, as the Royal We, can do some wonderful things now. But I think the jury might have an unrealistic expectation of what the forensic scientist can do.
Yes.
Yeah. And they get the prosecution side, they get the defense side, and then they may well get an expert witness as well, helping the court and helping them reach their decision. And they've got to just go on the evidence that they hear. But yeah, I think their expectations are fueled with drama.
Yeah,
it's very true.
It does complicate things somewhat, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And also, I think that also complicates it for lawyers because I don't know what their full understanding is. I don't know that a lot of them have a full understanding of forensic science, and they're the one going in delivering this evidence often.
Yeah, and it'd be unusual if the prosecutor or defense, for that matter, had a chat with their witness, their forensic science witness who was going to appear for them. To my experience, it was unusual for them to have a chat with you, for them to fully understand what you'd find. They'd read all your documentation, of course they had, but to fully grasp the significance of how that fitted in with their overall case that they were going to present, they didn't normally come and do that.
No, it's interesting as well, isn't it? Because prosecution, take for instance a magistrate's court, whoever's on the circuit that day will walk in and they'll get handed a pile of case files and they'll have X amount of time to read over them. And it's not very long, a couple of hours if that. And then that's it, they're in court and they're trialing it and they're delivering that evidence. Now, if you get somebody who's working with defence, if you hire a defence lawyer, you get as much time as you pay for.
And that in itself is an issue, actually, because the amount of money that's made available to pursue your expert witness and the work that they're going to do and draft a report sometimes is lacking as well, really. So the defence aren't able to get maybe as much time as they would like from an expert witness because of costs, legal aid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, there we go.
Which was some of the issues in the Lucy Letby case, but I think that's another podcast.
Yeah.
So, Brian, we talked about the Forensic Science Service and you being a Home Office forensic scientist within the Forensic Science Service, and that it was quite exciting for you when you went in and felt like you were working as part of a great community and organisation where there was lots of research going on. And there was a time when the Forensic Science Service was essentially the centrepiece of UK forensic capability. And of course, that's closed now, which had a significant impact on the landscape of forensic in the UK. Do you remember hearing that announcement that it would be closed and what your thoughts were at the time?
Well, I left the Forensic Science Service in 2007. And the reasons for that were essentially, I think when you're in a particular role, if you feel you've gone as far as you can go and you maybe think, you know what, I think I need a change.
Yeah.
It's a personal decision. So after sort of nearly 30 years, I made that change. So I left in 2007 and the rumors started about 2010 or so, and then it closed in 2012. I'd moved on to academia at that stage. When you referred to the Home Office Forensic Science Service, then becoming the Forensic Science Service, losing the Home Office title, and where things were charged for. And you mentioned about that value to the UK. Without a doubt, it was globally seen as this great forensic thing taking place in the UK. It's labs, it's research. And to me, it was, if you were to take a blank sheet of paper and say, how could we construct the forensic science provision in the UK? You might come up with a series of labs and somewhere that does research.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get looked upon that way. Why was it closed? Who was pushing the buttons to actually close the Forensic Science Service? Because it was providing a lot of information, not only for the police forces, but for the government in terms of the DNA. And it was running that. And it was nearly as if we got to get rid of this thing. We've got to replace it. How are we going to do that? And I think it was quite sad. And we look at what we have now, we still have some fantastic scientists, without a shadow of a doubt, forensic science practitioners, without a doubt, highly trained, highly specialized, internationally recognized, a lot of them, which is brilliant. We still have them. But the structure of how that takes place, to me, just doesn't feel quite right. It just doesn't feel it hits the nail on the head in terms of making sure we provide the best information for a court to proceed on. And I think that's quite sad, to be honest with you.
I agree. There's a lot of concerns as well, isn't there, about more forensic work going in-house in policing? And then, how do you maintain that independence then? Because it's not supposed to be for the police to prosecute. That's not the purpose of the science, is it?
Yeah. The dilemma there, Angela, is that we've had fingerprints and crime scene within the police force, as it were. And it was
Yes.
the lab bit that was the separate bit,
Yeah.
where you could argue that certainly there is the lab bit, and there's the crime scene bit, and there's the fingerprints, which are all very, very important in that investigative process. But they should be there working for the court. And the police obviously have a role to play. It has to link closely with the police, but it's how we think and how we do our work. The structure's not quite right.
Yeah, I agree. And the privatization of a lot of it as well also brings its own complexities, doesn't it?
Oh, hugely, hugely. I always remember when it was talked about the FSS was losing something like 2 million a month, or a huge sum of money it was losing per month, and it had to close down, and then the police would take it over, and then suddenly the police start building their own labs, millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds. Where's that money come from?
Yeah. And then it means a lot's going to private labs as well, doesn't it? Which means then that the private labs have got the monopoly on how much they charge for certain services. And then you've got the police are just paying that cost rather than it being going directly from the FSS. It's from police budgets, which aren't huge to begin with. So it creates a lot of other issues there as well, doesn't it?
It is. It is. It's not. Do you know what? We're not going to resolve it in this podcast.
That's very
Certainly
true.
not.
That's a shame.
Isn't it? If only we could.
At the very, very start, you mentioned about academia.
Yeah.
And I said that I went to Strathclyde University for a master's course. And now there are various places that you can go to do master's courses. And they were referred to as Mickey Mouse courses. Literally, that phrase. And I think it was a Forensic Science on Trial. There was a chapter 5 or something, I think. It was all about education. What they didn't realize was that those courses were teaching the science in a forensic context, and that the skills that the graduates got in terms of communication, presentation of findings, arguing critically one way or the other, were what the transferable skills that those graduates took into various roles.
Yeah.
Certainly far too many students for the number of jobs that were going to become available. Maybe, I don't know, say 400 or 500 jobs a year available for 2,000 or 3,000 students in each year, and all these courses. It was a complete imbalance. But the skills, the employability of these graduates was high. And
yes,
it was the Forensic Science Society, now Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences, that started up its accreditation course for universities to make sure that they weren't what people referred to as Mickey Mouse courses. They were actually doing good science in a forensic context. And that is still true today, where they provide that accreditation and that reassurance for the students and for the parents who are looking at their kids going off to university to do a forensic science course. And then a few years ago, we were talking about the Quality Assurance Agency, QAA. They set what's called benchmarks for various topics. And we talked about having a benchmark within QAA for forensic science. And I remember that time distinctly, because the group of people looking at that were talking about it. And I remember my daughter at the time coming in and saying, why don't they stop talking about it and actually do something about it? and she often would say that. And I went to the group and I said, look, we've talked about this long enough. We need to do something. We need to contact QAA and see what we can do. And you know what? We did. We got our first benchmark. I don't normally boast the things I do, but I was so chuffed. I chaired that group that got the first benchmark statement out for the quality standard around teaching forensic science at BSc and MSc. And to put that together, you have to have the practitioners, academic, and the practice and the academics together, coming together to look at the standards. We've now had the second edition of the QA. They review it every sort of 5 to 7 years. We've reviewed it with the second edition out. And now the other day I rang them up to see, we need to think about AI. What about AI and forensic science?
Oh, yeah.
What about AI and academia? How's that all been used? There's a whole field of stuff there to think about. But to me, having the standards set for the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences, which are in all reality are the backbone of the QAA benchmark statement in teaching forensic science. I think it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful.
Well, that's just one of the things that you've done since leaving the
Yeah.
laboratory, isn't it? Because you moved over then into academia and education, and you went to Teesside. You were the head of the Centre of Forensic Investigation there. And as
Yeah.
well as doing the quality assurance agency and chairing that and pushing for those benchmarks and quality standards, you're also the president at some point of the Forensic Science Society. And you've been really, since leaving the lab, been shaping education and how that's delivered across universities and academia, and then also setting those quality benchmarks. What made you want to do that? Why was that so important to you?
Well, first of all, there was a criticism, like the Jill Dando case, there was a criticism of forensic science. There was a criticism of the forensic science courses, the Mickey Mouse courses, and they weren't Mickey Mouse courses. So the standards, if you like, we had to get rid of that phrase. We had to raise the standards, make sure the standards were right. So the society, Forensic Science Society, then had put together standards, and the QA benchmark was putting together standards. And to me, we've now raised the standards. So they're no longer those sort of courses that why would you send someone in those? You definitely send them on for the role if they want to go into forensic science in some form of discipline, or if they want to go in another job, the transferable skills that they get. To me, you were doing a good job doing what was right.
Yeah.
That means a lot to me, to be doing the things that were right. Yeah. Cool.
Well, you are,
Brilliant.
like we say, influenced education and accreditation and professional standards. And a significant amount of change is being done in that work. But what do you think the next generation still needs to learn?
Oh, it's a big one.
Do you know that you need to look to the past to see the future, don't you? Some people used to say. I just wonder, are we doing the right amount of training? Should we now be doing more training and understanding of the forensic process and people who get involved in that? But certainly, when you think of how things have changed with CCTV, with fingerprints and automatic recognition, with DNA, with AI coming in, there's a whole new raft of things to think about and make sure that they don't impact negatively on the good work of the forensic practitioner. And with forensic practitioner, I'm including crime scene examiner, the fingerprint expert, the person in the lab, all that arena, so they can still deliver good quality to the courts.
As digital forensic grows and grows, because that is expanding rapidly at the moment, and then we have AI, and then also this expansion that we have had of DNA, where a lot of people seem to think it's kind of the panacea and that's it. Do you think that the more traditional forensic sciences will get lost?
I don't think they'll get lost, Angela. I think they'll get reduced. And the difficulty with getting the reduced is you then have less people with the expertise that they are unable to maintain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lovely example going back was diatoms. There used to be only 2 people in the UK who could look at diatoms, and those cases were very rare. So you nearly had to be retrained to get yourself back up to speed again with it. It was the science of the lady Tricia Wiltshire, she's often called the pollen lady. She has developed a whole arena all around that. Absolutely fantastic. But, there aren't that many people like, well, there's nobody like Patricia.
Yeah, she is one of a kind, isn't she?
But you know what I mean? There's not that number of people with that expertise.
Yes.
And it isn't required every day. So we tend to lose the expertise. And you need someone else to check the work of that expert. And if they aren't there, or one works in one lab, another works for another company completely, how does that work get checked? So I don't think it gets lost. I think it just gets reduced. But we need to be careful of when things get reduced, it's the skill can still be brought back to life.
Yeah, because will the skill still be there? And if it's not getting used as much, I believe it'll still be required, because you never know when something like pollen, for instance, is going to play a significant role in any one case. You just don't know, do you? And if you think about pollen, for example, it helped solve the Somme murders, and it's been
Yes,
involved in other major investigations.
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And that lady, Patricia Wiltshire, has done a fantastic job in promoting it
Yeah.
and be able to convince you of the value of it, the value to the police and then the value to the court. Super
Yeah.
job. Credit to her. But the question is, what will the legacy be in
Yeah.
terms of other people learning and understanding of that particular discipline?
If you could wave a magic wand over the UK, what would be the first thing in forensic science that you would fix?
You know what that answer is going to be, and no one's going to like it other than those who are passionate about forensic science. You know, I would reintroduce a model to what we roughly had.
Yeah.
You need some sort of centrally coordinated research. Great, you
Yeah.
need that. And then you need labs that are all working to one standard. You can transfer stuff between them quite happily because that's where it's best done.
Yeah.
And you know that if you talk to the politicians, oh no, we can't go back to that. Why can't we go back to that? Why does it seem to have to be a retrograde step to go back to something that actually, as a model, was pretty good? It doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as what it was. Of course, it won't be the same as what it was. But the actual principle of that provision for the UK.
It worked in so many ways. And like you said, we were leading internationally
Yeah.
on forensic science research for so long.
Yeah.
You were.
You know, we've got, there are lots of other places in the world now doing some great forensic science as well. And yeah, you sort of feel you've gone from Division 1 down to Division 2 or 3, maybe, you know.
I agree. I recently read an article actually, and it was in a forensic magazine, and they were discussing exactly this. And they were saying that since the FSS shut, they think we lost a lot of experience. It's raised a lot of issues around the privatisation of the labs, even storage of exhibits. And their suggested solution as well was also going back to the model of what we had before.
Really?
Yeah.
So we have solved it in one podcast.
There you go.
Yeah. It'll be a difficult transition now, wouldn't it, really? When you got private companies in and how all that changes, be a difficult transition. But it shouldn't deviate you from, you know, what would utopia look like?
Yeah.
And you try and you say, what would utopia be? Let's strive for that. We might not reach it, but let's strive for it anyway.
What gives you the most hope for the field in the next decade?
Oh, I mean, there have been some positive changes that I hope can carry on and develop. If it starts with education, the university arena, great. If we can bring more training and understanding in CPD in, great. Development of the forensic science regulator. That was a great move, you know, that was a good move doing that, getting that in place and grow that and develop that. Technology will change again, won't it? Technology is
Yes, without a
changing.
doubt.
And particularly around AI. I sometimes get excited about what it might bring, and then sometimes I get downhearted about what it can bring as well.
Yeah.
You know, which is really can be quite worrying. You got to carry on knowing what you want to try and achieve, whatever it's going to take to get the best evidence for the court. I've said that before, and I'll say it again.
I think anyone listening to you, Brian, can tell how passionate you are about the world of forensic science. And as you've said yourself, you've been doing this now for nearly 40 years. What keeps you so passionate about the subject?
You know, I think when you're passionate about something, you never really lose that passion. And if it's something that you have enjoyed and you can see value and you can see that you can convince yourself that you've made a difference. Nobody else might think that, but you think I've made a positive difference.
Yeah.
Then you carry on. Oh my goodness, it's nearer 50 years than 40. That's scary.
Yeah, because you were 30 years in the forensic
course,
science
yeah.
service and then 8 or 9 at Teesside and then all of the quality work on top of that.
Yeah.
Plus
And you're still
50,
going.
isn't it?
Yeah, apologies. I robbed you of a whole decade there, Brian. That's appalling.
But don't forget, you go back to the time when you were guys were at Teesside. That's come back a bit now as well. We're all getting older.
We're all getting older.
We are,
That's
definitely.
very true.
Feel it as well.
So with that in mind, thinking about kind of what's kept you passionate and kept you going, and the fact that it is almost 50 years for you working in this field, I think a nice place to round up would be your legacy. And what do you think your legacy is after so many years in this field?
I think my tombstone will say, enjoyed working for the Home Office Forensic Science Service and Forensic Science Service. Would certainly advocate any individual joining their professional body. I mean, I joined the Forensic Science Society as a student when it was a learned society, and it's now moved on to professional body. And I have enjoyed my time with that, the number of people that I've met. But I think it's around the quality standards, certainly in the education arena now, at my latter years, that I'm so chuffed that we've got those standards to work to, and we'll continue to have them. And the QAA ears are open to making sure we further develop that. I was speaking with them a couple of weeks ago, and they're on board with the next stage already, which is great. So that idea of setting standards and saying, when we do our accreditation, it's so important to actually meet the students. And when you see them and how they're enjoying, and they don't all have the passion, but you can pick out several who have the passion. They've got that little magic, like we mentioned about Jill Dando. He got that little bit of magic in terms of her TV programs. Individuals have little, you can see those who have the magic for whatever they do. And that just stays with you. That's a flame that never goes out.
Yeah. Lovely. I think part of your legacy as well is going to be the impact that you've had on the people around you. So you're well known and loved in the forensic science world. Whenever we talk to anybody about you, the response is always just with joy. But then also the students that you've impacted, and us in particular, we're two of those. We've got to work with you well beyond university, which has brought us great joy. And I think that a lot of your legacy is also, going to be the impact that you've had on people.
That's very kind of you to say. I think you overplay it a bit, but thank you. We'll take that.
Very true. We're clinging on to you for dear life. We'll not let you go anywhere yet.
Even if you try and retire, we're still hanging on to your ankle. No, don't leave us. Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate you taking the time.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So echo what Ange says, thank you very much. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed that episode as well. We're sure you have. And we will be back in a fortnight's time where we will take you back under the barrier tape.